Now, the Taliban have rejected international calls for a ceasefire in Afghanistan, where their fighters continue to gain ground. There are reports today that the Taliban has seized a 6th provincial capital in the north of the country, the city of Aibak. Afghan military commanders say they've pushed back the militants from the outskirts of Mazar-i-Sharif, also in the north, where there's been intense fighting.
The cost of this 20-year military engagement has been astronomically high in lives and financially. Over 2,300 US servicemen and women have been killed and more than 20,000 injured, along with more than 450 British servicemen and women. Of course, hundreds more from other nationalities. And that doesn't even begin to cover the death toll of local Afghani populations.
Now, the Ulster Unionist MLA and former soldier Andy Allen MBE served in Afghanistan in 2008. Andy lost both legs above his knee and is partially blind as a result of an attack by the Taliban in Helmand using an IED. Andy spoke to us a little earlier and began by telling us how he feels watching the news reports coming out of Afghanistan.
I suppose looking upon Afghanistan now and the various news reports, because that's what we're reliant on to see what's happening in the country at this present time, it causes me to feel mixed emotions. But I'm deeply upset, and it makes me to ponder whether obviously we've delivered the policy objective in the wider context of delivering a better Afghanistan for the people there.
Did you think this would happen when the West essentially pulled out?
I suppose, I'm not one of the generals. I'm not one of the strategic minds in terms of Afghanistan. I was there as an ordinary soldier on the ground trying to deliver a better Afghanistan for its people. There always was the possibility, as the coalition forces withdrew from Afghanistan, that we would see what is unfolding now. But it's important to look at it from the context of mission failure in that regard. We needed to equip the Afghan forces and the Afghan people with the resilience to be able to build a better future for themselves. Looking at what's happening in Afghanistan now, it would lead you to question whether that has been achieved.
I mean, over 450 British soldiers lost their lives. Just for those who don't know your story, just remind us what happened to you. You paid a terrible price.
Yeah, the price I paid was not to the extent of what some paid in Afghanistan. I was one of the fortunate ones who came back. I served in Afghanistan in 2008, in which I was caught up in an improvised explosive device in a place called Musakala. That blast, unfortunately, took off my right leg with the force of the blast, and 10 days later I had to have my left leg surgically amputated. It also burnt my face and eyes and has left me visually impaired to this day. Some would say a huge price, but when I look at it, if we were building that better future for the Afghan people, I look at it in the context of, I wouldn't say being worth it, but helping towards a better future for the Afghan people. Indeed, I built up a bond and a relationship with an interpreter in Afghanistan, a gentleman called Wahid, and I discussed at length with Wahid about his vision and the desire for them to have a better Afghanistan, an Afghanistan where they could have the basic fundamentals of healthcare, of education, and of basic fundamental rights.
You talked about the policy objective going in. In simplest terms, remind people what that was.
I suppose looking at it from my context, Declan, there were a number of policy objectives. The first and foremost policy objective was to prevent Al-Qaeda having a safe haven within Afghanistan in which to launch their terrorist campaign. For me, I look at my individual mission there, and that was about bringing about a better future, if you like, giving the individual Afghan people the building blocks to build that better future. Ultimately, as one person, I couldn't do all of that, but collectively, I'd certainly hoped that we had a vision of building that better future for the Afghan people.
Are we seeing that now, that better future?
I suppose the only people that can truly attest to that will be the Afghan people, but from the news reports that we're seeing, I would probably be led to believe, no, we're not. We're seeing an even more war-torn Afghanistan, which will ultimately affect individual Afghanistans. So, no, I'm not sure that we have.
I'm not sure, Andy, what outcome there would have to be to make what happened to you seem in any way worth it. But when you watch the news nightly now and see what is unfolding, does it thoroughly depress you? And do you ever wonder what it was all about from your own point of view and from the point of view of all those US and British soldiers who went there, were terribly injured or lost their lives?
I suppose it would be only natural to look at it from that point of view, Gareth. Yes, do I reminisce and do I think about Afghanistan? And as I said before, fundamentally what I was looking at was as an individual within Afghanistan, the wider context of the military operation there. I was hoping to try to build a better future for the Afghan people, but I'm not naive in believing it was a huge task. I suppose when we look at it fundamentally, has our foreign policy failed the Afghan people? It perhaps has. I would call for a major rethink in that. And I think it's been reported that we could see ourselves looking at whether we need to go back to Afghanistan in later years, and that would be an absolute disaster. I believe we failed the Afghan people. We haven't delivered them the better future that we promised them, but also fundamentally, we've also failed those who have served in Afghanistan. We failed to provide them with the aftercare and the support that they need on a daily basis. Indeed, I work with many veterans who served in Afghanistan who still relive the horrors and the trauma.
Is the West best place to decide what is best for the Afghan people?
The Afghan people are best placed to decide for them, but I firmly believe we were there to help them on that journey, and as I've said before, giving them the building blocks to achieve that better future for themselves. Only the Afghan people can best decide what is best for them, but unfortunately they do need help and support in achieving that, because the Taliban is an evil force.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. What, in your eyes, is there to fear from the Taliban and their, well, it's been described as their lightning offensive over the past few days?
Well, I suppose, whenever I was in Afghanistan myself, even the fundamentals of children being able to be educated, that was not allowed to happen in Afghanistan. So even if we look at the fundamental principles of education, it was a time that the Taliban blew schools, destroyed schools so that children could not be educated.
You said that there may come a point when the West has to go back in. Politicians trying to bring that about would find resistance, surely.
Absolutely, I feel they would, because obviously if you fundamentally look at our failure in Afghanistan now, there would be major opposition to going back towards Afghanistan, absolutely, and that would be natural. There's been a huge price paid in Afghanistan, and many people will have their own individual views on that themselves.
Much has been said about the Afghan employees who helped Allied forces there, the British, the Americans. You've already made reference to Wahid. How concerned are you for them, and how much help do you believe they are owed?
I believe we owe them a huge debt, and indeed that was something I discussed with Wahid when we were talking about the better vision for Afghanistan. Obviously, there was two elements to that. One for Wahid was that he was able to remain in Afghanistan and build a better future for himself and his children. But the other was fundamentally, if that better future could not be delivered for Afghanistan, that he would look towards his future being outside of Afghanistan.
Do they deserve asylum here? Should they want it?
I absolutely think so, yeah, because they're not safe in Afghanistan. I believe that we should do everything that we possibly can. They put their lives literally on the line to help the British forces and American forces and other coalition forces in Afghanistan. So absolutely, we should be doing everything that we possibly can.
And that's Andy Allen, the Ulster Unionist MLA, who lost both legs when serving as a soldier in Afghanistan.